Welcome to Don't Panic Geocacher, a channel devoted to helping you unlock the mystery of mystery caches. My name is Aryan and I go by Waterfan5 on the geocaching.com website, and I'm here in this video giving one more step in how to solve mystery caches or puzzle geocaches. Episode 5 is called Check the Usual Suspects. This is step 5 of a series of 10 that basically teach you a structural approach on how to solve mystery caches and make sure you don't miss anything. This episode is the usual suspects, and we'll talk about common techniques that are so common that they're always worth checking into and see if they're being used for the mystery cache that you try to solve. So what are these usual suspects? Well, as I mentioned, these are common techniques, codes, puzzle techniques that are so well known that they are a very good candidate for mystery caches. So these are techniques that kind of worldwide or have a common knowledge and understanding because people that make mystery caches often want to make them solvable. Sometimes not, sometimes you find one that are truly meant to be unsolvable, but in most cases the cache owner wants you to solve it, and so they have to rely on techniques that they expect a large amount of people to know. And those are the suspects, and they are worth checking into since they're often used. It makes sense to use them because that way they get more solves and get more people to enjoy their geocaches. However, if they want to make them harder, they're often disguised as well. So the usual suspects, of course, is a reference to Casablanca, where it says arrest the usual suspects, round up the suspects. And so same thing you kind of have to do here. You always have to look at the usual suspects if you don't know what to do. Could it be any of the usual suspects? So what are these usual suspects? Well, I divided them in two categories, codes and techniques. These are 5 different techniques that are commonly used, kind of like mess with the data that you're looking at to decipher. That could be if it is numbers and letters, that it is some kind of base conversion. Mentioned this in the previous training. We live in a decimal system, but if you go to like only 8 digits octal system, very popular binary system, you end up with only 2 digits, 0 and 1s. Very common technique that even have a step in a puzzle that a base conversion is used, where you say, oh, convert to binary, convert from hexadecimal, 16. So now it uses numbers and letters. Other ones are the Caesar technique or the shift rotation, where the letters are shifted in the alphabet. So you see some example of hello world, but then if you shift it in the alphabet, now it all goes one up. So I, F, M, M instead of H, E, L, L. Of course, the more you shift in one or other direction, you get a very unreadable text, right? Common technique, geocaching.com website uses it itself by the rot 13, rotate 13, right? Where every A basically just to convert it the other way around. So it's kind of like opposite the alphabet compared to it. So this is something that you have to take a look at where is a shift rotation. It could be a generic rotation where a letter is just substituted with a symbol or a character. So here you see an example of that, where you see all these symbols taken from a font. And so you will only see the symbols on the page. You kind of have to match the letters to it. And I will go into this video in how a common technique, how to do that, even if you don't know the alphabet. Ciphers, book ciphers is very commonly used. And that is that you get some kind of indexed into another text. Maybe there's a song lyric or a poem or a book. And it could be anything from like, oh, line, word, letter to page, if it is a book. Paragraph could only have 2. Maybe it's only sentence and letter. Maybe it's only word and letter. Maybe it's just letter. Cat letter number 15, cat letter number 20. So book ciphers frequently used in puzzles, but the most frequently used and often overlooked technique is counting. Simple, you have to count something, you just don't know what you have to count. Maybe you have to count the number of times the letter A is used. Maybe you have to count the number of yellow characters. Very popular technique, and even the most experienced geocachers often overlook simple counting and they immediately start jumping into more difficult techniques. So it's good to always check these. Could it be any of these? Is there something simple to count that I just need to count and get to a solution? Is there something where I can just rotate the letters in the alphabet, even as a step in the puzzle, or any of the other one mentioned here? 5 common techniques. So for you, it's important to make sure you familiar yourself with those techniques and make sure how to do them and how to solve each one of them, since they're so frequently used. The same with codes. There's hundreds of codes, and I will show you literally hundreds of them in this video. But 4 very popular ones are Morse code, Braille, a keypad or a phone cipher, slightly reversed, or a keyboard cipher, meaning that the keyboard itself is used. And literally the keyboard is used to tell you a cipher and give you a code. So it's always worth to um, use those when looking uh, at the puzzle to see if any of those are being used. And so there's several websites that will give you a lot of these, and it's worth looking at them. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. So here is a code that you may see on the page. And now the question is, could this be one of the suspects? So technique-wise, it could be a substitution, could be an index. Now, if it was a book cipher index, then often you see the same amount of pairs each time, either 2 or 3 or 1 number. And these numbers vary quite a bit in difference. So in this case, I'm not thinking it's a book cipher. I'm thinking it might just be a simple substitution where every, in this case, number combination will correspond to a single letter or number. Second is, well, let's take a look at the code. Could this be Morse code? Certainly there's a way to make this dots and zeros, for example, with even and odd numbers. Every even number is a dot, maybe every odd number is a dash, and so that would give me dashes and dots. Many ways of doing that. I could say like, well, if it's 4 length is this, and so there's many variations here that I can think of making this to Morse code. So certainly would be worth trying. Could this be related to a phone? A phone has numbers on it, so definitely could be associated with a phone. So also would be worth exploring that path to see if the phone would solve and give us to a solution. However, in this case, it's actually a Braille code. There's a couple of hints here that we're talking about. It's actually an official standard that's being displayed here at the code. So you can actually find certain websites that will be able to code this if you enter it. But in this case, the other hint, of course, is that only numbers 1 to 5 are used. 6 is not used. This stays a little bit coincidence because of the code that is shown. But of course, it's 6. Because what it has done is basically given every dot specific number. You see here 2 examples of how it could have done. So, for example, we'd start at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or we could go down and go from left to right. So there would be 2 examples of how you can give the dots numbers. And so there's often something to look out for, right? So you see a code and you have to try to force fit it into these usual suspects because they're just worth trying. If you don't know what it is, there may be a good step because they're used so often. Now, how are they used in this case? Well, let's take a little bit of a deeper look. So we see 2, 3, 4, 5. And so I colored in here 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we see if we look it up, that corresponds to the letter T. And the same 1, 2, 5. So colored it letters 1, 2, 5. And you see now that corresponds to H. And so on. I is 2 and a 4. And we see 2, 3, 4. It could have been even slightly more difficult by putting the numbers in different orders. So in this case, they're nicely sorted from smallest to biggest. That is not necessary because the order in which you fill them in doesn't work out. It could have been represented in a different way. It was a more difficult puzzle. May have given this in a hexadecimal code, or may have given them in the shape of pictures. There's lots of ways to disguise it, but at the end, the technique to use was that common suspect of a Braille code. And if you translate this, you would simply get the message, this is Braille. And that's why it's always good to never exclude those combinations or those codes, because they're so commonly used in encrypting messages. And here is the other example of a frequently used usual suspect. So again, we can go over the list and see, can we make the usual suspects work? So could this be related to a keyword? Well, absolutely. We're looking here at words and they're spelled on a keyword. And maybe we have to convert this to numbers where X is on row 4 or skim is on row 2. And so we can give them all numbers to each of the words of where they're located on the keyboard and maybe add something that get to a text. So certainly keyboard possible and one of the avenues we should consider when solving this. Could it be Braille? Well, we can convert it to dashes and dots, and maybe that can be converted to binary. Would be pretty complicated to get the good words, so, but again, all possible. And could it be a substitution that all these words are somehow representing a letter? Either a letter substitution, shifts, and again, probably they're all possible, and so they're avenues to try, but it's worth to try all the avenues if you don't know which way to go. Usual suspects are typically not a waste of your time, again, given how often they're used. In this case, we're actually looking at Morse code. Well, that would be hard to see immediately because nothing here looks like Morse code. So see dashes and dots. But actually, this is a dash and dot cipher. And in this case, there's multiple ways of how you would do that with letter. So I found this one recently on one of the geocaches that I solved. And yeah, Morse code was used here. You think of, well, how can this be Morse code? I just see letters. Well, there's multiple ways. At Morse code, you just have to think about, I need dashes and dash. I just need to have a way to do that. So for example, I could separate vowels, and every vowel is a dot, every consonant is a dash. Or separate them in the alphabet. First 13, last 13. First 13 a dot, last 13 a dash. Or I could alternate them. So A, C, and E, etc. So all the odd numbers are a dot, all the even numbers are a dash. Now make words of that. So let's take a look at this. So if we would do that, so if I go to the first one, then I say X, that is in the second group, so it's a dash, skim, they all happen to be in the first one. So that's all dot, 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 me is dot, dot. And so this would be a way to now get it to Morse code. Again, there's many different variations. Hopefully a puzzle like this would have given you some hint. Maybe you were looking at Morse. Often the word Samuel you may see in there, or some other type of hint that you're looking at Morse. And now it's up to you to figure out how good is Morse code, right? You could even convert it just literally to Morse code and see if the dots and dashes would at the end help you do a second step conversion. But in this case, what was actually done was through the code that I described here of odds and evens. And so we have here a Morse code. And if I now look at the table, a single dash would go to a T, 4 dots goes to an H, double dot goes to I, etc. So get the same words that we got before. So this is code. And again, we had a usual suspect, just very well disguised within a puzzle. And so when you're stuck with a puzzle, you really don't know what to do with it. It's always good to see, could it be Morse code? Could it be Braille? Etc. Here's the last example, and then we'll go solve some actual geocaching puzzles. We see a cipher like this. Now, first thing that I would look at if I see like these little tuples, so little pairs of numbers, is kind of like a book cipher. Book cipher can be 1 digit long. That could be an offset in a single string. It could be two. Then it could often be like either word, number, or sentence and letter, if it was a sentence code that somebody is referenced. And you'll often see that it may be like some reference to, for example, lyrics that might be mentioned, and you need often a lyric, or a poem is very popular that you see a poem, and you kind of have to start counting, say, go to the second line, take the fifth letter, go to the third line, go take the sixth letter. Or if it's Multiple could even be words that you have to add together. So there might be three things that you see. So it is go to second line, go to the fifth word, take the third letter. Or if it's divided in paragraphs, it could be going to the second paragraph, go to the fifth line in the second paragraph, and go to this letter in that line. So it's up to you to figure out what the numbers represent, but they're all variants of what are called book ciphers. So we're thinking this is a book cipher. However, if nothing else is given, there's no poem or there is no lyrics, then again it may have to go back to our usual suspects. So could this be at the end Morse code? Probably. Figure out a way to make Morse code into it. But it's not really convenient because we have 9 here, and so doesn't becomes a little bit more trickier to do that. But there's one of the usual suspects that's the prime candidate here, and that is the keyboard, because a keyboard has by itself has rows and columns, right? You can see number of rows here indicated by the white. We have here 4 different rows, or actually 5 if you count the space. And then we have the offset of the different letters on the keyboard. So if I go to 2, 5, then 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we end up at the letter T. 3, 6, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 5, 6, and we get the H. You see here the same sequence that started with the other examples. It's where this is, and in this case, it stands for this is a keyboard code. Now, keyboards are used a lot in variations. Keyboards have the advantage of having letters and numbers, having symbols, and so there's lots of variations to look at the keyboards. And for quite a few puzzles, just staring down at your keyboard and seeing, can my keyboard provide the answer? It can actually provide you the answer to a lot of puzzles. You just have to figure out how. So we've seen variations that the symbols are used, that the keypad is used on the keyboard, or that the keyboard location is used itself. So again, it's one of the usual suspects that is worth looking at when solving a puzzle. Also worth looking at in this case is, if you don't immediately see it, is that having to realize that there's more than one keyboard layout. So for example, this is another keyboard layout. Not very popular, it's called the Dvorak keyboard layout. I think in this case this looks like the right hand one. There's also a left hand one, and so there's a mapping between a regular keyboard and this keyboard, and that can be used. You also see that the symbols are in slightly different locations. That could be making a mess out of things. Hopefully, again, you'll have some kind of hint, but take that into account that there is different keyboards out there, and so keyboard could still be used in a certain cipher technique, even be like a BlackBerry keyboard or a phone keyboard or something else. But yeah, keyboards and keypads definitely popular, so another usual suspect to take a look. And here is an example of an actual geocache, in this case located in the UK. Made this for a friend of mine who's then since then stopped geocaching, so I kind of adopted the cache. And this was a yeah, specific puzzle. Person loved puzzles, and so I worked with them to come up with a puzzle that was along their interest. And so we see here a bunch of butterflies. And the page is also a hint, and it says types of butterflies to make it slightly. For a lot of people, this is a fairly tricky puzzle, and so I would like to see how you can, how I would go about solving this. So types of butterflies is actually a pretty big hint, because that means that we can kind of like ignore rotation, ignore the size, because we're only interested in the type. And so we see the same butterfly type several times on the page, right? So this one, and this one all look like the same. Blue one is pretty distinguishable, so every blue one. So this feels to me like a substitution, right? Very much a substitution cipher. And the first thing when I think of a substitution cipher is, of course, well, I need to figure out what letter, what butterfly in this case represents what water. Is there some kind of butterfly alphabet that I'm not? There's a couple of good resources, and let's take a look at those resources. So here are a few resources that can help you when you're looking for a substitution cipher slash font that maybe has characters or symbols that you don't recognize. So if any of you are familiar with puzzles, one of the first websites you probably get introduced to is the Geocaching Toolbox. The Geocaching Toolbox has a variety of tools. Used them in some of the other puzzles and training sessions already. And one of them is that they have the so-called code tables, cipher lists. They have uh, 60 plus of them. And for example, we can click here Futurama cipher, and then we can see that every of these symbols basically correspond to a letter. So the cache page would have the symbols, or the ones for representing the numbers, and basically this gives you a corresponding letter, and now you can become readable again. And as I mentioned, there's about 60 of them. So that looks like quite a bit, and of course the usual suspects are on there as well, like Morse code and Braille. They're on there as well, but also some more obscure ones, like the one I just showed. So great resource and can already solve some common puzzles for you by having like a translating it to uh, yeah regular a regular alphabet. One that has slightly more is the Cache Sleuth website. So if you go to the code tables section, then click on that. You see that it has over 200 of them. So if I click on the code tables, I will see a list, and it will guide me through a list of all the different ones that are out there. And you'll find, of course, the same ones again that you see on the other ones. So you'll see an overlap, but you also see, of course, since this one has 200, you'll see more examples. Now, since you're only seeing one character, it might be harder to recognize. But if you know what you're looking for, you can actually use the website to give you kind of like an example of what it would look like, and then you can kind of compare it to your text. So if you go to the code tables and say view all examples, you could say, well, we're looking for north 25 is what we expect it to look. So we type that in. It will actually generate north 25, all those different characters. So now we see what north 25 like in alphabet code, ancient. And so it goes through all the codes that it's familiar with and show you what that text would look like. It's also a great resource to make puzzles, because if I wanted to use one with ballet figures, well, already works it out for you, right? And you see just a lot of different variations from Words on the Wire, a very popular cipher used outside geocaching. All kinds of variation. And you can kind of scroll through the page and see if you recognize what you're looking for. In this case, I was looking for butterflies. Don't see specifically here a butterfly cipher being mentioned here, but maybe it has a different name. So I would scroll through it, see if I see something that looks like butterflies. So 200 is a lot. However, that's still nothing, because if we go to Omniglot, Omniglot is a non-geocaching related website, so I don't think the word geocaching will be mentioned here a lot, but it has a lot of codes in there. Often ones with real life, so writing systems that may be ancient or current in different languages, constructed codes, and all kinds of variation on here as well. So if I, for example, go to alphabets, we'll see current alphabets being used across the world. Maybe have very limited use, but all different variations that some people are familiar with, but are great for geocaches, because you see a certain script, somebody may not necessarily know right away what it is, and now you have basically encoded and you have a puzzle there. So it has a ton of different ones, as I mentioned, both real ones as well as constructed script ones. So uh, for other languages that are, again, either real or fictional languages. There's lots of them out there. Now, if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of hard, and you have to kind of like search through them. But once you know what it is, for example, the cache page may give you a hint and say, oh, it's Sanskrit. Then you could go here and find what the translation is and what it would like, and kind of goes through it, right? It has an example for all of them. Take a look at those. So all kinds of variations, great website. You get a little bit of the cultural background here as well. So it's a fun website to go through. You also have a search feature. search feature, you have to watch out because it uses Google. So, for example, if I typed here butterfly, I would recommend typing minus boggle behind it because there's a lot of boggle discussion on this website. And so if I filter that out, I get less hits, and now you basically see um, some discussion. So you see actually some butterfly pictures here, but nothing here that looks like, and I typed it, I should say boggle. That's what I should have typed in. And now it will only filter back to the alphabets, and I can take a look and see if maybe that is what this is. So we see here different ones, but nothing that really looks like what we looked at before. Most of these will actually be actual languages and not so much fictional ones, although they do have those as well on this website. Finally, the one that's probably my favorite one to use because of the way it's visual. It is in Dutch, not so much a problem for me, but for a lot of them that might be an issue. But fortunately, most of the descriptions are in a language that you can still easily read it because they all have their own language. But the good thing about this one is, and so this is called my codebook, how it translates, but give the URL later. My codebook basically gives lots of pages, but they give the entire alphabet. So here you can just browse through, see all the characters that are being used. So you have basically one resource that you can just scroll down. You can scroll down a line. You can even download it to your phone if you want to. If you happen to do it in the field, and you see a bunch of nice variations. Initially, they'll most likely have an overlap with either Cache Sleuth or Geocaching Toolbox, where it has 200. But this has way more than 200 on there. And as we go down, we'll find more and more cryptic variations of how numbers can be. Of course, we see the usual suspects like Brill and other variants, Kix code, block code. I think we saw that on some of the other sites, dancing man ciphers, um, sign language, different variations of sign language, and so on. Latin, Roman numerals, all different ways to encode, right? But in this case, we were looking for butterfly. Now, again, this is a Dutch one, so the word butterfly might not work. Try through a translator and try the Dutch word for butterfly, but no, nothing. So kind of out of luck here. But that means that the cipher that was used is not one of a common alphabet, or at least not one available in resources, and we'll have to use a different approach to solve it. I will show that as well. So back to our cute little butterflies. We had a suspicion that it was like a substitution cipher, but we couldn't find online a translation to what a butterfly represents one. That means that we have to do it the hard way and give them a letter ourselves. So can verify and see, for example, we already did that the same one was used several times. And if you look closely, you can actually sequences being used. For example, this series of 3 here, though in a slightly different orientation, is also used right here. So whatever letter combination this is, most likely here. Here we see 2 blue ones with a purple in front. See 2 blue ones with a purple in front. So yeah, we have a good feeling that a simple substitution will help here. So let's give them all a letter. Now, this can be quite tricky. But you have to look carefully. So multiple monitors helps here. Harder to do on the phone. But at the end, you can give them kind of like a code where all of them have now a letter assigned to them. So we see here A, B, A, because this one and this one is the same one. So that repeats the A. Get C and D, but the C was used here. And we see those repeating sequences that we saw before. AHA, AHA, that is the same sequence that we had right there, and the same one here. CEFGG, CEFGG. So we kind of have reduced this complicated picture with all these butterflies that we kind of didn't know how to code to now just a sequence of letters in the alphabet. And now we can start looking at patterns. I discussed in one of the previous lessons, I talked about how you can convert those letters to a code, some of the tools, some of the tricks to use. We see here that letters up to O is used, kind of like at the end is the last one being used. That's almost more than half of the alphabet. That gives me a hint that we're probably not looking at true English sentences, but more looking maybe at a coordinate being described here. If it was up to 10, most likely it was just numbers, just binary, just two variants, right? Just A and B, so it could be Morse code or binary or something that only uses two. But since it uses almost, but not all characters of the alphabet, coordinate description looks pretty good here. So we're looking something for like north, west, a certain number sequence, maybe a dot or a point in between, maybe degrees is used. But if not, like only 2/3 of the letters are being used here, then that gives me a kind of hint that I'm looking at a lot of repeating words. And we already kind of knew that by the fact that we saw these repetitions in, right? Something you typically see in a coordinate, that number 3 might be appear in multiple places. So they may have slightly obscured it, but it isn't the normal English language distribution, although vowels would be still used more. So since I didn't want to repeat myself, I will use a different tool this time to solve this one and the simple substitution cipher using a different website. Last time I think I used Decode. This time I will use website. So I'm going to use the website Quip. QuipQuip is a website that's really used for these type of substitution ciphers, but has the unique capability of having the auto solver as well as a great cluing mechanism on the website. Last time I used Decode, where I can clue it in myself, but then the auto solving mechanism disappears. This one has the combination of the two, and so can be really useful in solving. There's different variations where you can say take spaces into account, do a dictionary search, where kind of like use a dictionary at the front, like twice different words. It can also just say give me a clue, and then based on letter frequency, that kind of like um, fills in clues for you. So you see how the clues are formatted. You can either do single letters. So for example, G is R, or you can do multiple letters where you say this is this word. So if we try solving this, so for example, as a dictionary, it really won't find anything yet. But if I do just a clue, well, based on letter frequency, it will now say, oh, we think the G is an S. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what it thinks here. And so we can type in those clues for you. Well, we have actually a better clue because we think it's a coordinate. So we think it may start with a common word like north. Well, north wouldn't fit because in the first letter and the third letter would have to be the same. But if you look at the cache location, this is in the 50s. The word 50 actually fits very nice in the beginning. So if I say ABACD is 50, and now press solve, you will see that it immediately will start converting everything else and kind of like fills in the rest for you of different variations. We see that the topic actually almost gives us the immediate coordinate right away in a very format. Yep, 50 apparently was good guess. 3, 4. Well, that doesn't go well. So J is clearly wrong. So I could say that should be an S. And now put it again forward. Still use the other one as clues, right? So we could say, yeah, that was correct. You good here. And the same, this part, that was also good. That was clearly a 4. But after that, it went south with it. So, and now we can see, we could just, oh, I should have put B, so it's a J. So let's try it again. So now 53, 4, 7, 2, 8, 9 kind of have the coordinates spelled out. We have only one mix match. You see it hasn't reused any of those letters here. It says sim because it's a valid word. Of course, in this case, we're looking for 6. Solved our puzzle. Okay, time to look at another puzzle. This one is called Geoheist Contact info, rated by me. And it's not a field puzzle, 3.5 difficulty, so we can expect some difficulties here, maybe some more complicated techniques that we have to be used. And also it's not a field puzzle. Every one of this series starts with the same, kind of gives you background. There's a heist, there's 9 caches associated with it. Most of them can be solved individually, but some of them require that you have solved some of the previous ones. And it will tell you that. And then we'll find the puzzle right here. We also see a checker, so as you learned from previous lessons, always open them to see what's going on. And it tells here keyword required. So that's important here. So we know that in this case, we're not looking for a coordinate, we're actually looking for a keyword that we have to enter here. So we expect the outcome of a puzzle to be a single word or a series of words. So yeah, here we see a QR code. Well, first thing we can try is to scan it. I can already give you the answer. It won't scan, will fail. You see a couple of weird things here. Letters normally don't see the QR code. And now the whole goal of this training was to say, try the usual suspects. So we had the usual techniques. Doesn't really look like a book cipher. Doesn't really look like it's some kind of base conversion that is being done here. This looks mostly like a substitution, right? We see the letter A's, B's. So this is trying to teach me some kind of alphabet, is what it looks like. Don't know which alphabet, but also here, maybe we should try some of the usual suspects there too. Could it be Morse code? Well, dot dot dashes, dot dot dash. Yeah, I could make this Morse code. Doesn't look very promising, but dot dash dot dot is a letter. Dash dot 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 dot. Also, if we start looking at, and so yeah, potentially this may have been Morse code and would have been a good avenue to try. This case, however, it won't lead to the solution, and if we work this all out, we see that Morse code at the end wasn't the right avenue. Okay, we tried it, we can mark it in our book and our notes, tried Morse code, didn't seem to work, right? It's always good to keep notes and see what you've been doing. In this case, we notice something else. Every time V is used, for example, looks the same. We see the same with some of the other letters, that they are kind of seem to have the same formatting that is being used if the letter is used multiple times. So that's kind of like gives us a good confidence that maybe substitution is the way to go here, that every letter will correspond to another letter. So that leaves us the final usual suspect is the Braille code, and so let's take a look at that. We see here some blocks, so that's already good. White blocks and dark blocks, that corresponds nicely. So let's take a look at that. So we'll push this page to the side. And from the Cache Sleuth website, I opened up the Braille page, and so we can start comparing. Also like always to use Notepad for my notes that I can then later on copy into something else if I want to save them. So in this case, just start here at the top, MM, and say, okay, I see 2 dots here. In Braille, it's very straightforward that 2 dots, there's only one that will correspond. It's an I. Actually see a next one, D, that looks identical, so that will also be an I. Doesn't really start looking so great. Y, and also an I. 3 different I's in a row. It doesn't look too promising. Maybe I'm on the right track. Or maybe I'm starting at the wrong place. So maybe I'll just start with the first letter in the alphabet, with the A. So I'll sort these nicely. Now say A is okay, so slightly different, 2 dots in opposite direction. That is an E. Let's go to the B. See what we see there. 2 at the top and 1 below. 2 at the top and 1 below. That is the letter M. This is another thing that you often have to do with puzzles, right? Don't give up too quickly on an approach. You don't see it working right away. So same with the Morse code. Probably want to work that all the way through to make sure that we don't miss anything and it becomes better later on. Because Morse code was a good candidate, hence the difficulty of the puzzle. Multiple good avenues to go. So far we have letter E and I'm M. Okay, yeah, not bad, not great. Let's go to the next one, the C. C looks like a single dot. Here, a single dot is an A. Oh, actually, this starts slowly looking because now EMAI, right? D we had already done before. Yeah, could be email. Let's try the next one, the E. It's here in the middle. See 3 below. That corresponds to the L. So email. And we're on the right track here. Because at the end, if we start doing all the letters, we'll get a sentence that starts with email and then we'll give you contact information. And we don't yet need to contact that email address. You can. You will get an answer back with some more information that will help you with a future puzzle. But For this puzzle, we just need the contact information because remember, this one was looking at a keyword. We enter the contact, the email address in this text, and we'll see that it has the right. Note, just as a hint here, it will pretty much want it exactly the same way you spelled it. So you can just write it as an email address, enter it here, and that will then click Solver. And we've solved the geocache. It will give us the coordinates. So today we used a lot of useful links. So I've just put them here. Cache loops, you use a geocaching toolbox for the ciphers. Didn't use decode, this is one. Great website, has a lot of ciphers as well. And here you see a couple more. I used Quip for the substitution cipher. And then the link to the codebook that has a lot of information in there and has all the pictures that you can download. So another useful resource where you can just visually see, does this match the alphabet that I'm looking for? So a couple of great tools that you can utilize for your analysis. So that is the end for this session. Hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe so you will be notified when new lessons drop, when new steps drop. So we're currently about halfway to this series, but there's a lot more coming. If you want to leave a comment, highly appreciate it. If you have suggestions, questions, you would like me to go into a specific topic, feel free to contact me and say what you would like to know more about, and I can maybe do a specific topic for one of the other videos. You can contact me at waterfan5 at the geocaching.com website, or you can email me at geocacher.waterfan5@gmail.com. Send me your information, send me what you would like to do. Maybe there's one of your puzzles that you would like me to cover in one of the videos. More than happy to do that as well. And with that, I hope this will make you panic a little bit less the next time you see a mystery cache. Thank you very much.